The gunshot that ended Ethan Everett's cattle drive career came from his own brother's pistol, and the wound that split his kneecap apart hurt less than the betrayal that followed. He had trusted Marcus with everything, including the herd they'd spent 3 years building together on the open ranges of Nevada. And in one drunken poker game in Carson City, Marcus had signed away their entire future to a railroad man with cold eyes and colder contracts. When Ethan confronted him outside the saloon on that blistering July evening in 1877, Marcus drew first and fired without hesitation, leaving his younger brother bleeding in the dust while he rode off with what little money remained. The doctor in Virginia City did what he could, but Ethan's leg would never bend right again, and the limp that followed him from that day forward became a constant reminder that trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. 6 months later, Ethan found himself in Eureka, Nevada, a silver mining town nestled in the Diamond Mountains where the population swelled daily with fortune seekers and those running from their pasts. He took a job mucking stables at the Emerald Hotel, work that paid poorly and demanded he stand on his damaged leg for hours, despite the grinding pain that shot through his knee with every step. The other men who worked the stables were drifters like himself, broken in their own ways, nursing wounds both visible and hidden. They rarely spoke beyond necessities, and Ethan preferred it that way. Words were just another way to lie, another weapon people used to cut you down when your guard dropped. The hotel stood 3 stories tall on Main Street, its false front painted green to match its name, though the paint had faded to a sickly yellow in the harsh desert sun. Eureka bustled with activity despite the harsh conditions, its population nearing 9,000 souls, all chasing silver dreams through the maze of mines that honeycombed the mountains. The town had telephones in some of the fancier establishments, and the railroad had finally reached them 2 years prior, connecting this isolated mining camp to the rest of the civilized world. But civilization was a thin veneer over the violence and desperation that simmered beneath the surface. Ethan kept his head down and his thoughts to himself. He lived in a cramped room above the stables that smelled perpetually of hay and horse manure, and he spent his evenings alone, reading dime novels by candlelight when the pain in his leg allowed him to focus. At 24 years old, he felt ancient, worn down by disappointments that should have taken a lifetime to accumulate. The other stable hands sometimes invited him to join them at the saloons that lined Ruby Hill Avenue, but Ethan always declined. Alcohol had destroyed his brother's judgment and ruined Ethan's life in the process. He wanted no part of it. He had stopped believing in joy altogether. It seemed to him that happiness was something that visited other people, skipping over the broken ones like himself, as if misery were a contagion that joy feared to catch. He watched couples walking arm in arm down Main Street, saw families gathered outside the Mercantile on Saturday afternoons, observed children playing games in the dusty roads, and felt nothing but a distant curiosity, as if he were watching creatures from another species whose behaviors he could observe but never truly understand. Winter came hard to Eureka that year, the mountains turning white while the town itself remained caught in a bitter cold that seeped through walls and froze water in buckets overnight. Ethan worked through the cold, his damaged leg aching worse in the freezing temperatures, making each day a test of endurance. He developed a routine of wrapping his knee in strips of wool cloth each morning, a ritual that bought him a few hours of bearable pain before the throbbing started in earnest. It was on a particularly bitter morning in late January when she arrived. Ethan was hauling fresh hay into the stables when he heard the commotion out front. A stagecoach had pulled up, its horses steaming in the frigid air, and several passengers were climbing down, their faces red from the cold. Among them was a woman with auburn hair tucked under a sensible traveling bonnet, her gray wool coat buttoned to her chin, carrying a worn leather case that looked too heavy for her slender frame. She stumbled on the last step, her boot catching on her skirt, and would have fallen face first into the muddy street if Ethan had not dropped the hay bale and lunged forward, catching her elbow just in time. His knee screamed in protest at the sudden movement, nearly buckling beneath him, but he managed to steady both himself and the woman before either of them hit the ground. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying a slight tremor from the cold or perhaps from the near fall. That would have been a terrible way to arrive in a new town. Ethan released her arm immediately, stepping back. "Careful of the ice," he said gruffly, then turned to retrieve his hay bale, eager to escape the interaction. "Wait," she called after him. "Is this the Emerald Hotel?" He paused, not looking back. "Yes, madam. Front entrance is around that way. Could you help me with my trunk? The driver just left it in the street." Ethan turned slowly, taking in the large steamer trunk sitting in the mud where the stagecoach driver had indeed abandoned it. The man himself was already guiding the coach toward the livery stable down the street. Ethan's first instinct was to refuse, to tell her to find a porter, but something in the way she stood there, alone and clearly exhausted from travel, made him bite back the dismissal. "I will get it," he said instead, limping over to the trunk. He bent to lift it and immediately knew it was a mistake. The trunk weighed at least 80 pounds, packed full of whatever possessions she had brought to this silver town in the middle of nowhere. His knee protested even before he began to lift, and as he hauled the trunk up, something in the joint ground together in a way that sent white-hot pain shooting up his leg. He must have made some sound, because suddenly she was beside him, taking one end of the trunk. "Let me help." "We can carry it together. I can manage," he said through gritted teeth. "Clearly you cannot," she replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than critical. "And I am perfectly capable of carrying my own belongings. I should not have asked a stranger to do it in the first place. On 3. Before he could argue further, she counted off and lifted her end of the trunk. Together they carried it up the steps and through the front entrance of the Emerald Hotel, where warmth from a roaring fireplace immediately enveloped them. The lobby was modest but clean, with a worn rug covering the plank floor and a desk where a thin man with spectacles looked up from his ledger. "Miss Lillian Zimmerman?" the clerk asked, and the woman beside Ethan nodded. "Yes, I sent a telegram ahead about the room." Of course. "Welcome to Eureka. We have you in room 12, second floor facing the street. Will you be staying long?" "Indefinitely," she replied, and Ethan felt a small spark of curiosity despite himself. Women did not come to mining towns like Eureka to stay indefinitely, unless they had very specific reasons, usually involving either work in one of the saloons or joining a husband who had gone ahead to stake a claim. "My condolences on your brother," the clerk said, pulling a key from the board behind him. "Jacob was a good man. This town is poorer for his loss." The woman, Lillian, closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you. I only wish I could have arrived before he passed." Understanding clicked into place for Ethan. She was here because of a death, not a new beginning. He knew that particular kind of journey all too well. "I will need help getting this upstairs," the clerk said, glancing at Ethan. "You able, or should I fetch Thomas?" Ethan should have said to fetch Thomas. His knee was already swelling inside his boot, and he could feel the familiar hot pulse that meant he would be in agony by evening. But he found himself saying, "I can do it." They carried the trunk up the narrow stairs, Lillian insisting on taking the back end to reduce the weight on Ethan's side. When they reached room 12, She dug a few coins from her purse and tried to press them into his hand, but he shook his head. "No need," he said. "You hurt yourself helping me. Please." "I hurt myself a long time ago," he replied, then immediately regretted the words. He did not share personal information with strangers. What was wrong with him? She studied his face for a long moment, her eyes a surprising shade of green in the lamplight. "What is your name?" "Ethan Everett." "Thank you, Ethan Everett. I hope your leg feels better." He nodded and left before she could say anything else, limping back down to the stables where he belonged. The rest of the day passed in a haze of pain and routine work. By the time evening came and the other stable hands left for the saloons, Ethan could barely put weight on his leg. He dragged himself up to his room, collapsed on the narrow cot, and stared at the ceiling while his knee throbbed in time with his heartbeat. He tried not to think about the woman with auburn hair and kind eyes who had insisted on carrying her own trunk. He tried not to wonder what had brought her to Eureka, or who her brother had been. He tried to maintain the careful numbness he had cultivated over the past 6 months, the protective shell that kept him from feeling anything beyond the physical pain. That was his constant companion. But that night, for the first time since Marcus shot him, Ethan dreamed of something other than betrayal and loss. He dreamed of green eyes and a voice that carried warmth despite the cold. The next morning, Ethan woke before dawn as always, his knee stiff but slightly better than the previous evening. He wrapped it carefully, pulling the wool strips tight enough to provide support but not so tight as to cut off circulation, a balance he had learned through painful trial and error. The stable work did not wait for injuries to heal, and he had already missed too many days in his first months in Eureka. Thomas, the head stable hand, was patient but not charitable. If Ethan could not do the work, someone else would take his place. The cold had intensified overnight, and frost coated the windows of his small room in delicate patterns. Ethan broke the ice that had formed in his water basin and splashed his face, gasping at the shock of it. His breath clouded in the air as he dressed, pulling on the same worn clothes he wore every day. Rough canvas trousers, a flannel shirt that had once been red but had faded to a dusty pink, a leather vest with several buttons missing, and the heavy wool coat that was his most valuable possession. Down in the stables, the horses greeted him with soft whickers and stamping hooves, their breath adding to the fog in the cold air. There were 14 horses currently boarded, belonging to various hotel guests and permanent residents of Eureka who could afford the luxury of keeping a mount. Ethan moved through the familiar routine of feeding and watering them, mucking out the stalls that needed it, checking hooves and teeth for problems that might need the farrier's attention. He had just finished with the last stall when he heard footsteps on the stairs leading down from the hotel. Expecting Thomas, or perhaps one of the guests coming to check on their horse, Ethan glanced up and was surprised to see Lillian Zimmerman carefully descending the steps, one hand on the rail, moving slowly as if afraid of slipping on the frost-slicked wood. She wore a simple dress of dark blue wool, practical rather than fashionable, with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders and sturdy boots that looked well broken in. Her hair was pulled back in a simple bun at the nape of her neck, a few loose curls escaping to frame her face. In the morning light, Ethan could see that she was perhaps a year or two younger than himself, with fine lines around her eyes that suggested she smiled often, though she was not smiling now. "Good morning," she said when she reached the bottom of the stairs. "I hoped I might find you here." Ethan set down the pitchfork he had been holding and wiped his hands on his trousers, though it did little good. "Something wrong with your room?" "No, the room is fine. I wanted to apologize for yesterday. I should not have asked you to carry that trunk." It was clear you were injured, and I made it worse. You did not make anything worse that was not already bad, he said, then softened his tone at her stricken expression. I mean to say, the injury is old. Nothing you did caused any lasting harm. She nodded but did not look entirely convinced. Still, I felt terrible after you left. I have been imposing on strangers since I left Missouri, and I keep forgetting my manners in my grief. She paused, swallowing hard. My brother Jacob died 3 weeks ago. Cave in at the Eureka Consolidated Mine. By the time the telegram reached me in St. Louis, he had already been buried 5 days. I came as soon as I could arrange passage, but I feel as though I am chasing a ghost, always arriving too late for the moments that matter. Ethan felt something twist in his chest, an uncomfortable sensation he had thought himself incapable of anymore. I am sorry for your loss. Did you know him? Jacob Zimmerman. He had been in Eureka for 2 years, working various jobs before he finally got on at the mine. Ethan searched his memory but came up empty. The town had so many people passing through, and he kept to himself enough that names and faces blurred together. I do not recall the name, but I have only been here since August. Did he leave anything behind? Property or belongings you need to collect? A few things. The mining company gave me a box of his personal effects from his locker, some clothes, a pocket watch that belonged to our father, letters I had sent him. Her voice wavered slightly. And apparently a debt. He owed 3 months back rent on a room he kept above the bathhouse. The landlord made it very clear that the debt transfers to family members, and if I want any of Jacob's remaining possessions, I need to settle the account. How much? $42. The sum hung in the air between them, a fortune for someone newly arrived with no source of income. I have some money, but not enough to pay the debt and live on while I figure out what to do next. I was hoping to find work, but I am discovering that options for respectable employment are limited for women in mining towns. Ethan knew she was right. Women in Eureka generally fell into a few categories. Wives of miners or merchants, prostitutes working the saloons and brothels, or the occasional widow running a boarding house or laundry. For a single woman to arrive alone and seek work raised immediate suspicions about her character. "What kind of work can you do?" he asked, then immediately felt foolish. He had no jobs to offer her, but Lillian brightened slightly at the question. "I was a teacher in St. Louis. I taught at a girls' academy for 3 years before having to leave to care for my mother through her final illness. I can read, write, do figures. I can sew, cook, keep accounts. I am a hard worker, Mr. Everett, and I am not afraid of difficult conditions. I just need someone to give me a chance." An idea occurred to Ethan, so sudden and unexpected that he almost dismissed it immediately. But the words were out of his mouth before he could reconsider. "The hotel needs someone in the laundry. The woman who was doing it left last week to go back east with her husband. The pay is not good, but it comes with a small room and meals. Better than trying to survive on what you have while paying off your brother's debts. How do you know they need someone? I heard Thomas talking about it yesterday. The hotel owner, Mr. Calloway, is trying to decide whether to hire someone new or send the washing out to one of the Chinese laundries on Clark Street. If you want the job, you should ask today before he makes up his mind." Hope flickered across her face, transforming her features in a way that made Ethan's heart stutter unexpectedly. "Would you introduce me to him? Would you vouch for my character? I know we have only just met, but you seem like a good man, and I think your word would carry weight." Ethan almost laughed at that. His word carried no weight at all. He was a crippled stable hand who lived alone and spoke to no one. But looking at Lillian's desperate, hopeful expression, he found he could not refuse her. "I will take you to him now if you want." He is usually in his office at this hour. Yes, please. Thank you, Ethan. They climbed the stairs together, Ethan moving slowly because of his leg and Lillian matching his pace without comment. He appreciated that she did not try to help him or draw attention to his limp. Most people either ignored his disability completely, pretending not to notice, or else made a great show of offering assistance, and both approaches irritated him equally. Lillian simply adjusted her pace to his without making it seem like accommodation. Cornelius Calloway kept an office on the second floor, a cluttered room that smelled of cigar smoke and old paper. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with mutton-chop sideburns and a perpetually harried expression, the look of someone trying to manage too many things at once and failing at all of them equally. He glanced up from his desk as Ethan knocked on the open door frame. "Everett, is there a problem with the horses?" "No, sir. I wanted to introduce you to Miss Zimmerman. She just arrived yesterday and is looking for work. I heard you mention needing someone for the laundry." Calloway's eyes sharpened with interest as he looked past Ethan to where Lillian stood in the hallway. "You know how to do laundry, miss?" "Yes, sir. I have been doing laundry since I was old enough to lift a washboard. I am a hard worker and I learn quickly." "The work is hard and the pay is only $10 a week, plus room and board. You would be doing sheets, towels, tablecloths from the dining room, and personal washing for any guests who pay extra for the service. I provide the soap and equipment, but you do all the work. I expect the washing done properly, dried and folded neat. No shortcuts that will have my guests complaining about dirty linens." "I understand. I can start today if you need me to." Calloway leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You are Jacob Zimmerman's sister, are you not?" "I heard you arrived yesterday. Thomas mentioned it." "Yes, sir. Jacob was my brother. He was a good worker before he went to the mines, steady and reliable. I am sorry for your loss." The condolences sounded perfunctory, a social nicety rather than genuine sympathy, but Lillian accepted them with grace. "Thank you. Do I have the job?" "You do, on a trial basis. If the work is not satisfactory, I will let you go without notice." "Fair. Fair." They worked out the details, Calloway explaining that she would use room 15, currently empty, and would take her meals in the kitchen with the other staff. He would expect her to work 6 days a week, Sunday being a half day for church attendance if she was so inclined. Lillian agreed to everything without argument, and Ethan saw the tension gradually leave her shoulders as the conversation progressed. She had found work. She would be able to pay off her brother's debts and survive in this harsh place. When they left Calloway's office, Lillian turned to Ethan with tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you. You did not have to help me, but you did anyway. I will not forget this kindness." Ethan felt uncomfortable with her gratitude, with the warmth in her voice and the way she looked at him as if he had done something extraordinary. "I just told you about a job opening. You got it on your own merit. Nevertheless, thank you." She impulsively reached out and squeezed his hand, the contact brief but electric, then turned and hurried down the hallway toward room 15, leaving Ethan standing alone with the ghost sensation of her fingers still warming his palm. He returned to the stables feeling unsettled, as if something had shifted in his carefully ordered world. He told himself it meant nothing. He had simply done a decent thing for someone in need. There was no reason for his heart to be beating faster, or for him to keep replaying the sound of her voice saying his name. But that afternoon, when he glimpsed her in the hotel courtyard carrying a basket of wet sheets to hang on the drying lines, and when she saw him and smiled, waving with her free hand, Ethan felt something he had not experienced in months. A small, fragile warmth that flickered to life in the cold darkness where his heart had been. Over the following weeks, Ethan found his carefully constructed isolation cracking in small, almost imperceptible ways. It started innocently enough. Lillian worked in the hotel's laundry room, a steamy, cramped space attached to the kitchen, and her path to the drying lines in the courtyard brought her past the stables multiple times each day. She made a habit of greeting him whenever she saw him, never stopping for long but always offering a smile and a few words. At first, Ethan responded with minimal acknowledgement, a nod or a grunt that could not be mistaken for encouragement. But Lillian seemed immune to his gruffness, treating his reticence as simple shyness rather than deliberate unfriendliness. She told him small things about her day, observations about the hotel guests or funny incidents in the laundry, never seeming to expect much response, but appearing genuinely pleased when he occasionally offered a comment in return. Mr. Henderson in room 7 sent down a shirt with the most spectacular mustard stain I have ever seen, she told him one morning as she passed by with an empty basket. It covered the entire front, as if he had used the shirt as a plate. I have no idea how he managed it. Despite himself, Ethan felt his mouth twitch. Henderson eats like a starving dog. I have seen him in the dining room, no manners at all. Well, at least he keeps me employed. If all the guests were neat eaters, I would have much less to do. She paused, shifting the basket to her other hip. How is your leg today? I notice you are not limping as badly as you were last week. Ethan stiffened automatically at the personal question, but her tone held only genuine concern, no pity or morbid curiosity. It is better in warmer weather. The cold makes the old injury ache. My mother used to wrap her arthritic hands in cloths soaked in warm water before bed. She said it helped with the pain and stiffness. Maybe something similar would help your knee. Maybe, he said noncommittally, though privately he thought the idea might have merit. Anyway, I should let you get back to work. Those horses will not feed themselves. She smiled again and continued toward the laundry, humming softly under her breath. Ethan watched her go, troubled by how much he had enjoyed the brief conversation. He was supposed to be keeping his distance, protecting himself from further disappointment and betrayal. Getting close to people only led to pain. He knew this truth deeply, had learned it through bitter experience. So why did he find himself looking forward to these small encounters with Lillian? Why did her smile lighten something in his chest that had been heavy for so long? He tried to rationalize it. She was simply a friendly person being kind to someone she saw as lonely. It meant nothing personal. She probably treated everyone with the same warmth and openness. But even as he told himself these things, he could not quite make himself believe them. That evening, alone in his room, Ethan did try Lillian's suggestion. He heated water in a pot over his small stove, soaked a cloth in it, and wrapped it around his knee, rewrapping it several times as the cloth cooled. To his surprise, the heat did seem to ease some of the constant ache, loosening the tight muscles and allowing him to straighten his leg more fully than usual. He fell asleep that night with less pain than he had experienced in weeks, and when he woke the next morning, his knee felt genuinely better. The warm water helped, he told Lillian the next time he saw her, the words coming out more abruptly than he intended. Her face lit up with pleasure. I am so glad. My mother swore by it. Sometimes the old remedies work better than anything a doctor can do. Thank you for the suggestion. You are welcome. It is the least I can do after you help me find work here. She hesitated, then said, Some of the staff are getting together Sunday evening for supper after services. Nothing fancy, just whatever we can put together from leftovers. Thomas is bringing his fiddle. You should come if you would like. It will be in the kitchen after Mr. Calloway goes home for the day. Everything in Ethan wanted to refuse automatically. He did not do social gatherings. He did not make friends. He kept to himself because it was safer that way. But looking at Lillian's hopeful expression, he found himself saying, "Maybe I will." "I hope you do," she said softly, then hurried off to hang a basket of towels. Sunday came with unexpected sunshine. The winter cold finally breaking enough that people emerged from their homes and rooms to walk the streets of Eureka without hunching against bitter wind. Ethan spent the morning working in the stables as always, mucking and feeding and checking each horse carefully for any signs of illness or injury. He told himself a dozen times that he would not go to the staff supper, that it was foolish to put himself in a social situation where he would be expected to talk and laugh and pretend to enjoy himself. But when evening came and he heard fiddle music drifting from the kitchen, his feet carried him toward it almost against his will. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching the scene inside. Thomas sat on a stool in the corner, sawing away at his fiddle with more enthusiasm than skill, producing a lively if somewhat off-key tune. Several staff members had gathered around a long table loaded with mismatched dishes of food. Mary, the older woman who cooked for the hotel, presided over a large pot of stew. Young Billy, who ran errands and did odd jobs, was attempting to juggle 3 apples while a kitchen maid named Sarah laughed at his efforts. And there was Lillian, stirring something in a bowl, her face flushed from the heat of the kitchen and her hair escaping its pins in unruly curls. She looked up and saw him standing in the doorway, and her entire face transformed with joy. "Ethan, you came. I am so glad. Come in, come in." "Are you hungry?" "Of course you are. Mary has made her famous lamb stew, and I managed to bake biscuits that only burned a little bit around the edges." Before he could retreat or make excuses, she had him by the arm and was guiding him to the table, pressing a bowl of stew and several biscuits into his hands. The other staff greeted him with varying degrees of surprise. He knew them all by sight, but had never socialized with any of them beyond the bare minimum required for work. Thomas stopped playing long enough to nod. "Good to see you joining us, Everett. I was starting to think you were a ghost who only appeared to feed horses." "I keep to myself," Ethan said, then realized how unfriendly that sounded and added, "But I appreciate the invitation." "Any friend of Miss Lillian's is welcome here," Mary said warmly, ladling more stew into his bowl despite his protests that he had enough. "That girl has brightened this whole hotel since she arrived. Always cheerful, always willing to help. You should have seen her yesterday when old Mrs. Pritchard's cat got into the laundry and knocked over an entire bucket of wash water." Most people would have been furious, but Lillian just laughed and cleaned it up, then spent an hour searching the hotel until she found the cat and returned it safely. Lillian blushed at the praise. The poor thing was just confused. And the sheets needed rewashing anyway after Mr. Henderson's mustard incident. Everyone laughed, and Ethan found himself smiling despite his usual guardedness. The food was good, better than the solitary meals he usually ate in his room, and the company was easier than he had expected. Nobody pressed him to talk more than he wanted to, but when he did contribute to the conversation, people listened with genuine interest. After they had eaten, Thomas resumed playing his fiddle, and to Ethan's shock, several people began dancing in the small space between the table and the stove. It was nothing formal, just silly spinning and stomping to the music, but everyone seemed to be enjoying themselves immensely. "Do you dance?" Lillian asked, appearing at his elbow with 2 cups of coffee. "Not with this leg," he said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "That is all right. I am a terrible dancer anyway. I always step on my partner's feet." She settled into the chair beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "I am," he admitted, surprising himself with the honesty. "Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for coming. I know it probably was not easy for you. Thomas said you have been keeping to yourself since you arrived in Eureka. I have my reasons. I am sure you do. We all have our reasons for the things we do, the walls we build." She took a sip of her coffee, watching the dancers spin past. "I almost did not come west, you know. I was terrified of leaving everything familiar behind, of traveling alone to a place I had never seen. But Jacob was the only family I had left, and I could not let him be out here all alone. By the time I got up the courage to make the journey, he was already gone." Her voice caught. "I keep thinking about all the time I wasted being afraid when I could have been here with him." Ethan set down his coffee and, acting on instinct rather than thought, reached over and briefly squeezed her hand. "You cannot blame yourself for things you had no way of knowing would happen. I know. But knowing something logically and accepting it emotionally are two very different things." She turned her hand in his, squeezing back. "What happened to your leg? If you do not mind my asking, you do not have to tell me if you would rather not." For 6 months, Ethan had deflected or ignored every inquiry about his injury. But sitting in the warm kitchen with fiddle music playing and Lillian's hand in his, he found he wanted to tell her, wanted to share the weight of the story he had been carrying alone. "My brother shot me," he said simply, "over money and stupidity and a poker game that never should have happened." Lillian did not gasp or offer empty platitudes. She just listened as he told her the whole story, from the cattle drive to the betrayal to the pain of realizing that family bonds meant nothing when greed and alcohol were involved. He told her about the long recovery, about learning to walk again with a limp, about the crushing realization that his dreams of building a ranch were over before they had truly begun. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Joy skips the broken, does it not? That is what it feels like sometimes. Like happiness visits everyone else but steps over people like us, the ones who have been hurt too badly to deserve it anymore." Her words hit him with unexpected force because they articulated exactly what he had been feeling. "Yes," he said. "Exactly like that. But I do not think that is true," Lillian continued. "I think we just have to work harder to find joy, to recognize it when it appears, and maybe to accept that joy can come in small moments rather than grand gestures, like good food shared with kind people. Like a conversation with someone who listens, like the feeling of accomplishing a hard day's work and knowing you did it well, like having someone suggest warm compresses for an old injury," Ethan said. She smiled. "Yes, like that." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the others dance and laugh, and Ethan felt something inside him begin to thaw, like ice breaking up in a spring river. It was terrifying and exhilarating at once, this feeling of connection, of mattering to someone and having them matter in return. When the evening finally broke up and everyone went their separate ways, Ethan walked Lillian to the stairs leading up to her room. "Thank you," he said, "for tonight, for listening, for understanding." "Thank you for trusting me with your story," she replied. "I know that was not easy." They stood facing each other in the dim hallway, and Ethan felt the pull of something he had not experienced in years. The desire to know someone better, to spend more time in their presence, to matter to them in return. It was frightening how quickly Lillian had begun to slip past his defenses, but for once, the fear did not make him want to run. "Would you like to have breakfast together sometime?" The words came out awkward and uncertain. "I usually eat alone, but if you would like company, we could meet in the dining room before work." "I would like that very much," Lillian said, her green eyes reflecting the lamplight. Tomorrow morning," he agreed. That night, Ethan lay in his bed above the stables and thought about Joy. about whether it really did skip the broken or whether, perhaps, broken people had to learn to recognize joy in different forms. He thought about Lillian's smile and the way she had held his hand while he told her the worst moments of his life. He thought about the warmth in her voice when she spoke to him and the hope that was starting to grow in his chest like a fragile seedling pushing through frozen ground. For the first time since Marcus pulled that trigger, Ethan allowed himself to imagine a future that held something other than pain and loneliness. It was a dangerous thing to hope, a risk he had sworn never to take again. But as he drifted off to sleep, he found he wanted to take that risk. Lillian made him want to try again, to believe that maybe broken things could become whole if they found the right person to stand beside them. The breakfast became a regular occurrence, evolving from awkward politeness to genuine enjoyment over the course of several weeks. Ethan would arrive at the dining room just as the kitchen opened, claiming a small table near the window, and Lillian would join him shortly after, her hair still damp from her morning washing. They would eat simple fare together: eggs and bacon, biscuits with jam, coffee strong enough to fuel a hard day's work. At first, their conversations remained surface level, discussing the weather or hotel gossip or small observations about life in Eureka. But gradually, they began to share more substantial things. Lillian told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her work at the Girls' Academy and how much she had loved teaching. She spoke fondly of her students, remembering their names and quirks with affection, and Ethan could hear the longing in her voice when she talked about the classroom. "You miss it?" he asked one morning in late February as rain drummed against the window beside them. "Every day," she admitted. "I know laundry is honest work and I am grateful to have it, but washing sheets is not the same as shaping young minds. I miss seeing a student suddenly understand a difficult concept, that moment when their face lights up with comprehension. I miss reading literature with them and discussing ideas that matter. I miss feeling like I was making a difference in the world. Could you teach here? Does Eureka have a school?" "There is a school, but the position is filled. A man named William Fletcher teaches all grades in a one-room building on Spring Street. I stopped by to observe one day, and he made it very clear that he has no need for assistants and considers teaching to be men's work anyway." She sighed. "Which is ridiculous, because half his students are girls who deserve to be taught by someone who believes in their potential, but I have no say in the matter." Ethan felt anger rise on her behalf. "That is foolish. You would be an excellent teacher. Thank you for saying so." She reached across the table and briefly touched his hand, a gesture that was becoming familiar between them, a small physical connection that both acknowledged their growing closeness and respected the boundaries of propriety. "What about you? Did you always want to work with cattle?" "Since I was a boy," he said. "My father died when I was young, and my mother remarried a man who ran a small ranch outside of Austin, Texas. My stepfather was a hard man, quick with his fists and slow with praise, but he knew cattle. Marcus and I spent our whole childhood learning the work, dreaming about the day we would have our own ranch. When we finally saved enough to buy our first small herd, I thought we were on our way to something great." He paused, the old bitterness rising. "I was a fool. You were not a fool. You were trusting, which is different. Marcus betrayed that trust, which makes him the villain, not you for having believed in your brother. I should have seen the warning signs. He had always been reckless, always chased excitement over stability. I just thought that would change once we had something worth protecting." "People rarely change their fundamental natures," Lillian said quietly. "My brother Jacob was always restless, always chasing the next big opportunity. That is why he came to Nevada in the first place, convinced he would strike it rich in the silver mines. I tried to convince him to stay in St. Louis, to find steady work there, but he was certain fortune was waiting for him in the West. And look where it got him. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. Dead in a cave-in before he turned 30. They sat and shared grief for a moment, two people who had lost brothers in different ways but understood the particular pain of that loss. Then Ethan said something he had not planned to say, words that emerged from some deep place he had kept locked away. "I am glad you came to Eureka, even though the reason was terrible. If Jacob had not died, you would not be here. And I would still be eating breakfast alone, thinking joy skips the broken." Lillian's eyes widened, tears now falling freely down her cheeks, though she was smiling through them. "I am glad, too. I did not expect to find anything good in this place. But then I met you, and you helped me when you did not have to, and you have been kind to me every single day since. You make this hard place bearable, Ethan." He wanted to say more, wanted to tell her that she did more than make things bearable, that she made him feel alive again after months of just existing. But the words tangled in his throat, too raw and vulnerable to speak aloud in the crowded dining room with other hotel staff beginning to arrive for their own breakfasts. Instead, he said, "Would you like to go for a walk this Sunday, if the weather clears? There is a trail up into the foothills that overlooks the town. The view is supposed to be impressive." "I would love that," Lillian said immediately. Sunday dawned clear and surprisingly warm, one of those early spring days when the desert remembered it was capable of gentleness. Ethan prepared for the walk with more care than he usually gave his appearance, washing thoroughly and putting on his best shirt, the one he had been saving for some undefined special occasion. His hands shook slightly as he buttoned it, nervous in a way he had not been since he was a boy. This was more than a walk. They both knew it. This was a declaration of interest, a stepping beyond the bounds of casual friendship into something that could become much more significant. It was a risk, and Ethan had sworn off risks, but Lillian made him want to be brave again. He met her in the hotel lobby, and his breath caught when he saw her. She wore a dress of deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and she had done something different with her hair, leaving it partially down so that auburn curls framed her face. She carried a small basket covered with a cloth. "I packed us a lunch," she explained. "I hope that is all right. I thought we might get hungry if we are gone for a few hours." "That is perfect," Ethan managed, his voice rough with emotion he did not quite know how to name. They set out through the streets of Eureka, heading west toward the foothills. The town was relatively quiet, most people either at church services or sleeping off Saturday night's excesses. They walked slowly to accommodate Ethan's leg, following a well-worn path that climbed gradually into the hills above town. Talking came easier in the open air, with the vast sky above them and no walls to contain their words. Lillian pointed out plants she did not recognize, and Ethan named the ones he knew. Sagebrush and juniper, the first brave wildflowers beginning to emerge from winter's grip. He told her about the open range in Texas, about driving cattle across endless grass under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. She told him about the Mississippi River, about boats with paddle wheels churning through brown water, about the city sounds she had fallen asleep to every night of her life until coming west. They were learning each other, Ethan realized. Building a map of who they were beyond the surface details, beyond the roles they played at the hotel. Out here, they were not a stable hand and a laundry woman. They were simply Ethan and Lillian, two people who had found each other in an unlikely place and were discovering they fit together in ways neither had expected. They reached a rocky outcropping about halfway up the hillside, a natural platform that offered a sweeping view of Eureka spread below them. The town looked different from this height. The buildings like children's blocks arranged in rough rows, smoke rising from 100 chimneys. Beyond the town, the valley stretched into the distance, brown and austere but beautiful in its harsh way. "It looks so small from up here," Lillian said, standing at the edge of the outcropping. "All those lives, all that struggle and hope and heartbreak, and from this distance, it is just a collection of buildings that will probably be gone in 50 years when the silver runs out. Does that bother you, the temporary nature of it all, sometimes? But then I think about how everything is temporary, really. Cities like St. Louis seem permanent, but they were wilderness once and might be wilderness again someday. Nothing lasts forever. So maybe the trick is to appreciate what we have while we have it, rather than worrying about how long it will endure." Ethan thought about his cattle ranch dream, how permanent and solid it had seemed until it shattered. He thought about the future he had built in his imagination with his brother, and how quickly that future had evaporated. Maybe Lillian was right. Maybe the answer was not to build impregnable fortresses meant to last forever, but to appreciate the fragile, temporary good things when they appeared. They sat on the rocks and ate the lunch Lillian had packed: cold chicken, bread, cheese, and apples. The food tasted better than it had any right to, or perhaps it was simply that everything seemed brighter and more vivid in her presence. Ethan caught himself watching her more than the view, mesmerized by the way the wind played with her hair and the expressions that flickered across her face as she talked. "I have been thinking about what you said," she told him between bites of apple. "About joy skipping the broken. I do not think that is what happens at all. No, no, I think joy does not skip us. I think we skip joy because we are so busy protecting ourselves from more hurt that we do not recognize happiness when it appears. We are so focused on the pain that we miss the good things happening right in front of us. And how do we stop doing that?" She turned to look at him directly, her green eyes serious and tender. "We pay attention. We let ourselves feel things even when it is scary. We take risks on people who might hurt us, because the alternative is living safe and alone forever, and that is not really living at all." "You are very wise for someone so young," Ethan said softly. "I am not that young. I am 22, plenty old enough to know my own mind." She paused. "And I know that I care about you, Ethan Everett, more than I probably should after such a short time. You are kind and honest and good, even though you have been hurt badly. You make me laugh. You listen when I talk. You see me as a person, not just a woman whose value is determined by whether she is pretty or accomplished or marriageable. Do you have any idea how rare that is?" Ethan's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. "I care about you too, so much that it terrifies me. When Marcus shot me, it was not just the physical injury. He broke something inside me, made me afraid to trust anyone or believe in anything good. I came to Eureka thinking I would work until I died, alone and bitter, and that would be my life. Then you showed up and stumbled getting off that stagecoach, and I caught your arm and somehow everything changed." "I am glad I stumbled," Lillian said with a small smile. "Best trip of my life." They both laughed, the tension breaking into something warm and bright. Ethan reached out and took her hand, lacing their fingers together, amazed at how right it felt. "I do not know what I can offer you. I am a crippled stable hand with no prospects and a family history of betrayal. I have no money saved, no land, no future beyond getting through each day. You deserve better than that." "Do not tell me what I deserve," Lillian said firmly. "I get to decide that for myself. And what I want, what I have been wanting since that first Sunday when we sat in the kitchen and talked, is to spend my time with someone who sees me for who I really am. Someone who treats me with respect and kindness. Someone who makes me feel less alone in the world. You are that person, Ethan. Everything else is just details we can figure out together." "Together," Ethan repeated, testing the word, letting himself believe it might be possible. "If you want that. If I am not presuming too much." In answer, Ethan lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently, a gesture of devotion and promise. "I want that more than I have wanted anything in a very long time." Lillian's answering smile was radiant, transforming her entire face with joy. She leaned forward and kissed him, quick and soft, just a brush of lips that nevertheless sent electricity through his entire body. When she pulled back, both of them were breathing hard, eyes wide with wonder at the intensity of the connection between them. "We should probably head back," Ethan said reluctantly, "before people start to talk." "Let them talk," Lillian replied, but she stood and gathered the remains of their lunch. "But yes, we should go. I do not want to give Mr. Calloway any reason to disapprove of me." They made their way back down the trail hand in hand, talking less now but communicating through small gestures and glances that said more than words could. The world felt different to Ethan, as if color had returned after months of gray. Everything seemed sharper, more alive, more meaningful. When they reached the hotel, neither wanted to part ways immediately. They stood in the courtyard, still holding hands, reluctant to break the spell of the afternoon. "Thank you for today," Lillian said. "It was perfect." "Thank you for taking a chance on a broken-down cowboy with nothing to offer but a bad leg and a worse attitude. You are not broken down, you are healing. There is a difference." She squeezed his hand. "I should go, but I will see you tomorrow morning for breakfast. You could not keep me away." She kissed him again, longer this time, and Ethan wrapped his free arm around her waist, pulling her close, memorizing the feel of her body against his. When they finally separated, both were flushed and smiling. Ethan watched her disappear into the hotel, then made his way to the stables feeling as if he were floating. His knee ached from the long walk, but he barely noticed the pain. His entire being was focused on the memory of Lillian's kiss, the sound of her laughter, the feel of her hand in his. Joy did not skip the broken, he realized. It waited patiently for them to heal enough to recognize it when it appeared. And it appeared in the form of an auburn-haired woman who had stumbled off a stagecoach and into his life, bringing light to places that had been dark for far too long. Over the following months, Ethan and Lillian's relationship deepened in the careful, deliberate way of two people who had both been hurt before and understood the value of taking things slowly. They continued their morning breakfasts, now sitting closer together, their conversations ranging from profound to silly, as they learned all the small details that made each other human. They took walks on Sunday afternoons when weather permitted, exploring the hills around Eureka and creating their own private geography of meaningful places. They were not hiding their relationship exactly, but neither did they make any public declarations. In a town like Eureka, where gossip spread faster than wildfire, they wanted to protect what they had from the corrosive effects of speculation and judgment. The other hotel staff knew, of course. It was impossible to hide the way Ethan's face lit up when Lillian entered a room, or the way she looked for him throughout the day, their eyes meeting across distances with shared understanding. "You are good for each other," Mary told Lillian one day in the kitchen. "I have been working at this hotel for 8 years, and I have never seen Ethan Everett smile before you came along. Now he walks around looking almost happy. It is a miracle." Lillian blushed at the observation. "He is good for me too. He makes me feel seen in a way I never have before." "Are you thinking about marriage?" Mary asked bluntly. "We have not talked about it. We are taking things slowly. Both of us have been hurt before, and neither of us wants to rush into something we are not ready for." But privately, Lillian thought about it often. She imagined a small wedding, maybe in the spring when wildflowers covered the hillsides. She imagined a life built together, children someday if they were blessed with them, growing old beside someone who genuinely understood and valued her. Ethan had similar thoughts, though he kept them to himself. The fear of disappointment still lurked in the back of his mind, whispering that good things never lasted, that he was setting himself up for another devastating betrayal. But Lillian was not Marcus. She showed up every day exactly as she claimed to be. Honest, kind, hardworking, and devoted to him in ways he was still learning to accept. His knee had improved significantly, though whether that was due to the warm, compressed treatment Lillian had suggested, or simply because he now had something to live for beyond mere survival was unclear. The limp remained, a permanent reminder of his brother's betrayal, but the constant grinding pain had diminished. He could work full days without agony, could take Lillian on their walks without suffering terribly afterward. In May, nearly 4 months after they had first met, Ethan received a letter that changed everything. It arrived at the hotel addressed to him in care of the Emerald establishment, forwarded from Austin through a complicated chain of contacts. The handwriting on the envelope was unfamiliar, but when Ethan opened it and read the contents, his hands began to shake. The letter was from a lawyer named Benjamin Shaw, representing the estate of Marcus Everett, deceased. Marcus had been killed in a bar fight in San Francisco 3 weeks earlier. According to the letter, Marcus had maintained a bank account containing nearly $3,000, money that apparently came from selling the cattle herd that was rightfully half Ethan's. With no wife or children, Marcus's estate legally passed to his only living relative, Ethan. The letter went on to explain that the money was currently being held in trust, pending Ethan's response. If he wanted to claim the inheritance, he needed to write back with instructions on where to send the funds. Ethan sat on his cot, rereading the letter 3 times, unable to process the information. Marcus was dead. The brother who had shot him and stolen everything was gone, and somehow, impossibly, the money had circled back. It was not everything they had built together, but $3,000 was a fortune. It was enough to buy land, enough to start over, enough to build the future Ethan had thought was lost forever. He found Lillian in the laundry room, up to her elbows in soapy water, her face flushed from the steam. When she saw his expression, she immediately dried her hands and pulled him into the corner for privacy. "What happened? You look like you have seen a ghost." "My brother is dead. And he left me money, a lot of money." Ethan handed her the letter, watching her face as she read it. When she finished, she looked up at him with a complex expression that held shock, sympathy, and something that might have been hope. "How do you feel about this?" she asked carefully. "I do not know. I should feel something, I think. Grief or satisfaction or anger, but mostly I just feel numb. He was my brother. We grew up together, survived our stepfather together, built dreams together. And then he destroyed it all in one night of stupidity. Now he is gone, and I am supposed to feel something about that, but I do not know what." Lillian took his hands, holding them between her own soapy ones. "You are allowed to feel complicated things. You can be sad that he died while also being angry about what he did to you. Emotions are not logical, and family relationships are never simple." "He gave me back my future," Ethan said slowly, the realization dawning as he spoke. "He stole it, and now he has given it back. With $3,000 I could buy land, start a ranch. Actually build the life I thought was impossible." He paused. "Build a life with you if you want that." Lillian's breath caught. "Is that a proposal?" "It is a question. Before I make any plans, I need to know if you would want to be part of them." If you would want to leave the hotel, leave laundry work, and take a chance on building something with me. A ranch, a home, a family, all of it together. Yes, she said immediately. Yes to all of it. I would choose you and building a life with you over anything else in the world. Ethan pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, breathing in the scent of soap and her skin, feeling the solid reality of her body against his. I love you, he said into her hair. I think I have loved you since that first Sunday when you said joy skips the broken, and I realized you understood everything I had been feeling. I love you too, Lillian whispered. So much it scares me sometimes. They stood together in the steamy laundry room, holding each other while the future rearranged itself around them. After months of brokenness and isolation, Ethan was whole again, not because the money had been returned, but because Lillian stood beside him, choosing him, loving him, believing in the possibility of happiness even when it seemed impossible. We should do this properly, Ethan said, pulling back enough to look at her face. I should ask you correctly. He awkwardly lowered himself to one knee, his bad leg protesting the position but holding steady. Taking her hand formally, looking up at her beautiful face with its streaming tears and radiant smile, he said, Lillian Zimmerman, will you marry me? Will you build a ranch with me somewhere outside this mining town? Will you have children with me someday if we are blessed with them? Will you grow old beside me and let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? Yes, she said, pulling him back to his feet and kissing him deeply. Yes to everything, always yes. They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church on Spring Street. Mary and Thomas stood as witnesses, along with several other hotel staff who had befriended them over the months. Lillian wore a dress of pale blue that Mary had helped her sew, and Ethan wore a new suit purchased with some of his inheritance money, the first fine clothing he had owned since before the cattle drive. The ceremony was brief, but meaningful. When the preacher asked if they promised to love and cherish each other through all circumstances, they both answered with voices strong and certain. When Ethan slipped the simple gold band onto Lillian's finger, his hands shook with emotion. When she repeated the gesture, sliding a matching band onto his hand, tears streamed down her face. You may kiss your bride, the preacher said, and Ethan did, pouring all his love and hope and gratitude into the kiss while their small gathering of friends cheered. The reception was held at the hotel, Mr. Calloway generously providing the dining room and Mary preparing a feast that must have taken her days to organize. There was roasted chicken and potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables brought up from the valley farms, and even a small cake that Sarah had decorated with sugar flowers. Thomas played his fiddle while people danced, and for a few hours, the difficult realities of life in a mining town faded away. Late in the evening, Ethan and Lillian slipped away from the celebration, retreating to the room that would be theirs for only one more night. Tomorrow they would begin their journey to the plot of land Ethan had purchased sight unseen based on a surveyor's recommendation. 200 acres with a reliable creek about 30 miles northwest of Eureka, far enough from the mining operations to feel isolated but close enough to reach town when necessary. Are you scared? Lillian asked as they prepared for bed, the sounds of the continuing party drifting up from below. Terrified, Ethan admitted. What if I fail? What if I cannot make the ranch successful? What if I lose everything again? Then we will figure it out together. We will find another way, make another plan. But Ethan, you are not going to fail. You are smart and hardworking and determined. And this time, you have a partner who will not betray you, who will stand beside you through every challenge. He pulled her into his arms, marveling that she was his wife, that he had the right to hold her like this, to share his life with her. How did I get so lucky? You caught me when I stumbled off a stagecoach, and you told me about a job opening. That is not luck. That is kindness recognizing kindness, brokenness recognizing brokenness, and choosing to heal together. They made love for the first time that night, awkward and tender and breathtakingly intimate. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow hotel bed, talking softly about their dreams for the future. I want to raise horses, Ethan said. Good stock that ranchers will pay premium prices for, and maybe some cattle, but horses are my real passion. I want a garden, Lillian replied. A big one with vegetables and flowers. And chickens, definitely chickens. And someday, when we are established, maybe I could teach the children of the ranching families in the area. Not a formal school, just lessons a few times a week for families too far from town to send their children to the regular school. You would be an amazing teacher. Those children would be lucky to learn from you. And they would be learning from you too. Think of all the practical skills you could teach them. Horsemanship and animal husbandry and how to survive in this harsh landscape. We could teach them together. Ethan felt something expand in his chest, a feeling he had never experienced before, complete contentment. For years, his dreams had been about building something alone or with his brother, but never with a true partner. Never with someone who saw his vision and added to it, making it bigger and better than he had imagined. I love you, he said for perhaps the 10th time that day, unable to say it enough. I love you too. Always. They left Eureka the next morning in a wagon loaded with supplies, tools, seeds, and everything they would need to start their new life. Friends gathered to see them off, Mary pressing a basket of food into their hands for the journey, Thomas shaking Ethan's hand and telling him he was losing the best stable hand he had ever employed. Take care of each other, Mary told them, hugging first Lillian and then Ethan. And write to us sometimes. Let us know how you are doing out there. We will, Lillian promised. And you must all come visit once we have the house built. The journey took 2 days, following rough roads that became little more than trails as they moved farther from town. They camped the first night under stars so bright, they seemed close enough to touch, exactly as Ethan had described to Lillian months ago. She lay in his arms by the campfire, and he pointed out constellations, telling her the stories he had learned as a boy. Look, there is Cassiopeia, the vain queen, and there is Orion with his belt. My mother used to say that if you followed Orion's belt down to the horizon on a clear night, you would find your way home no matter where you were. Are we home? Lillian asked. Getting there. One more day. They reached their land on the afternoon of the second day, and even Ethan, who had purchased it without seeing it, was impressed. The property sat in a wide valley with hills rising on 3 sides, protection from the worst winds. The creek the surveyor had mentioned ran clear and cold along the eastern boundary, lined with cottonwood trees that would provide shade and lumber. The land itself was a mix of grassland and scrub, not lush but adequate for grazing. What do you think? Ethan asked nervously. Lillian climbed down from the wagon and turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. I think it is perfect. I think this is going to be our home, the place where we build our life together. Where should we put the house? They walked the property together, finally deciding on a slight rise that offered views of the valley and the creek. They would build a barn first, Ethan explained, shelter for animals and a place to store their supplies. They could live in a tent or a lean-to attached to the barn until they had time and resources to construct a proper house. Most people would build the house first, Lillian observed. Most people are not starting a horse ranch. The animals need shelter before we do. Then that is what we will do. They worked from dawn to dusk every day, building a life from nothing through sheer determination and shared labor. Ethan's carpentry skills were rudimentary, but he learned as he went, and Lillian proved surprisingly handy with tools. Together, they constructed a sturdy barn, crude but functional, with stalls for horses they did not yet own and a hayloft that would serve as their temporary living quarters. In July, Ethan made the journey back to Eureka and returned with 4 young horses purchased from a rancher south of town. 3 mares and 1 stallion, all of good bloodlines. They would be the foundation of his breeding program, and he spent hours each day working with them, gentling them, beginning their training. Lillian planted her garden, watering it carefully from the creek, protecting the tender shoots from rabbits and deer. She set up a makeshift kitchen in the barn, cooking their meals over a small stove that Ethan cobbled together from scrap metal. It was hard work, harder than either of them had anticipated, but they were building something together, and that made every difficulty bearable. By September, they had proper walls framed for their house, and Ethan hired 2 men from Eureka to help with the heavy work of raising the structure. The house was small, just 4 rooms, but it was theirs. They had designed it together, arguing good-naturedly over details like where to place the windows and how large to make the kitchen. "I need counter space for food preparation," Lillian insisted. "And I need a workspace for tack repair and ranch records," Ethan countered. They compromised, making both spaces slightly smaller than either wanted but functional enough to serve their purposes. The first snow came in November, a light dusting that melted by afternoon. They were living in the house by then, though much remained unfinished. But they had a roof over their heads, a stove that heated the main room, and their bed, the first piece of furniture Ethan had built, constructed with such care that Lillian teased him about spending more time on it than on the barn. "A man wants his wife to be comfortable," he replied with dignity, then pulled her onto the bed to demonstrate just how comfortable it was. Winter was harsh but manageable. They had laid in supplies sufficient for months of isolation, learning from ranchers in the area what to expect. The horses stayed healthy in the barn, and Ethan spent the coldest months training them, working in the limited space to prepare them for the work they would do in spring. Lillian discovered she was pregnant in February, confirmed by an older ranch woman named Martha who lived 10 miles to the south and served as the area's unofficial midwife and medical advisor. The news filled them both with excitement and terror in equal measure. "A baby," Ethan kept saying, as if repetition would make the concept more real. "We are going to have a baby." "I know. I am the one carrying it," Lillian replied, but she was smiling. "Are you happy?" Happy does not begin to cover it. Terrified, overjoyed, overwhelmed. "I am going to be a father, Lillian. What if I do not know how? Then we will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." She took his hand and placed it on her still flat stomach. "This is our child, made from our love. However uncertain we feel, we will love this baby and do our best. That is all any parent can do." Spring brought new challenges and new possibilities. The horses had progressed beautifully in their training, and Ethan began the work of breeding his best mare to the stallion, hoping for a foal that would demonstrate the quality of his program. Word was spreading among area ranchers about the young couple building a horse ranch in the valley, and several people stopped by to see what Ethan was doing. One visitor was a grizzled rancher named Tom Preston, who ran cattle on a large spread to the west. He watched Ethan work with one of the young mares, putting her through her paces in the paddock they had built, and nodded with approval. "That is a nice animal. Good conformation, gentle disposition. You bred her?" "No, sir. Bought her as a yearling and did the training myself." "You have a hand with horses. I could use someone like you. If this ranch thing does not work out, come see me about a job." "Thank you, but this ranch thing is going to work out," Preston grinned. "I like your confidence, son. Tell you what. You get that mare bred and the foal proves out as good as the dam suggests. I will buy it from you at premium price. I could use horses like this on my spread, and I would rather support a neighbor than some distant breeder." It was exactly the kind of opportunity Ethan had been hoping for. "I will hold you to that." As Preston was leaving, he paused and said, "Your wife teaching those ranch children yet?" Ethan blinked in surprise. "How did you know about that?" Word gets around. "My neighbors, the Carsons, have 3 children who need schooling, and they are too far from Eureka to make daily trips. My own kids are grown now, but when they were young, we would have paid good money for a teacher who could come to the ranch. You should talk to your wife about it. Might be good income while you are building your horse business." The idea took root. Lillian was showing now, her pregnancy becoming visible, but she had months before the baby arrived. Together they crafted a proposal. She would offer lessons twice weekly, traveling to families within reasonable distance, teaching basic academics to children whose options were limited by geography. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Ethan asked. "You already do so much with the house and garden." "I miss teaching, Ethan. I miss it more than I can express. If I can reach even a handful of children, make a difference in their lives, it will feed something in my soul that has been starving since I left St. Louis." So Lillian became a traveling teacher, riding out twice a week on one of the gentler mares, visiting ranch families, and bringing education to children who would otherwise have none. She loved the work despite its difficulties, despite the long rides and the challenge of teaching multiple grade levels simultaneously. The children adored her, and their parents paid as much as they could afford, usually in cash but sometimes in goods. Eggs, milk, meat, vegetables from their gardens. Summer arrived with its brutal heat, and Lillian grew larger with their child. She continued teaching until August, when Martha finally insisted she stay home and rest. "That baby is going to come soon," Martha warned, "and you need to save your strength for the birthing." Their son was born on a September evening as the sun was setting, painting the sky outside their bedroom window in shades of orange and gold. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Ethan feared he might lose them both. But Lillian was strong and Martha was experienced, and finally, after hours of struggle, a baby's cry filled the house. "A boy," Martha announced, placing the tiny, squalling bundle in Lillian's arms. "Healthy lungs on this one." Ethan knelt beside the bed, staring in wonder at the red, wrinkled face of his son. "He is perfect. He is beautiful," Lillian agreed, exhausted but radiant. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months without reaching a decision. But looking at his son, Ethan knew exactly what felt right. "David. After my father, not my stepfather. The man who died too young but who my mother said was kind and good. I want our son to carry his name." "David Everett," Lillian tested the name. "I like it. Hello, David. Welcome to your life." The baby stopped crying at the sound of his mother's voice, his unfocused eyes trying to find her face. Ethan reached out one finger, and David's tiny hand wrapped around it with surprising strength. "He is holding my hand," Ethan said, his voice choked with emotion. "He knows you are his father. He knows you will protect him and love him and teach him how to be a good man." Ethan thought about his own father, dead before Ethan could remember him. He thought about his stepfather, who had taught through harshness and fear. He thought about Marcus, who had chosen greed over loyalty. And he made a silent promise to the tiny person gripping his finger. He would be better than all of them. He would be the father this child deserved. The years that followed were full of hard work and slow, steady growth. The ranch prospered incrementally. each season bringing small victories that accumulated over time. The foal born to Ethan's best mare proved exceptional, and Tom Preston kept his word, purchasing the young horse at a price that allowed Ethan to buy 2 more breeding mares. Word spread about the quality of Everett horses, and gradually, a reputation was built. Lillian returned to teaching when David was old enough to come with her or stay with Martha for a few hours. She loved the work and the children, and the income helped smooth the rough financial patches that were inevitable in ranching. David grew into a bright, curious child who toddled after his father around the ranch, learning about horses and land management before he could even speak in full sentences. When he was 3, Lillian gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, and 2 years after that, another son they called Jacob, after Lillian's brother. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family. Ethan added 2 bedrooms, a proper bathing room, and a larger kitchen. They built a chicken coop and a root cellar, planted an orchard that would not produce for years but represented faith in the future. The barn was expanded and improved, and a second barn was added when the herd of horses grew too large for the original structure. By 1885, 8 years after that January day when Lillian had stumbled off a stagecoach and into Ethan's arms, they had built something remarkable. The Everett Ranch was known throughout the region for quality horses. Lillian taught a dozen children from 5 different families, and there was talk of establishing a proper school building on neutral ground between the ranches, with Lillian as the permanent teacher. Their children were healthy and happy, growing up with the freedom and beauty of the open land. David, at 7, was already showing his father's talent with horses. Emma, at 4, had her mother's love of books and learning, and little Jacob, just 2, toddled around getting into everything with fearless enthusiasm. One evening in late spring, after the children were asleep and the ranch work was done, Ethan and Lillian sat together on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the valley that had become their home. It was a ritual they tried to observe whenever possible, this quiet time together at the end of busy days. "You remember what you said to me that day on the hill above Eureka?" Lillian asked, her head resting on Ethan's shoulder. "About Joy skipping the broken, I remember. It feels like a lifetime ago. You were wrong, you know. Joy did not skip you. It was waiting for you, waiting for both of us to be ready to recognize it, waiting for us to stop protecting ourselves long enough to let it in." Ethan thought about the man he had been 8 years ago, bitter, isolated, convinced that happiness was something that happened to other people. That man seemed like a stranger now, someone he barely recognized. The transformation had not happened overnight. It had been gradual, built through small daily choices to trust and hope and love despite the risks. "I was not wrong," he said slowly. "Joy really did skip the broken. But then the broken became whole beside you, and Joy found a place to land after all." Lillian lifted her head to look at him, her eyes, still as green and captivating as the day they met, shining with tears. "That is the most romantic thing you have ever said to me. I have been storing it up. I am not good with words like you are, but I wanted to find the right way to say what I have been feeling. You healed me, Lillian. You took someone who was shattered and put him back together, piece by piece, with your patience and love and faith. I look at our life, at this ranch and our children and everything we have built, and I am overwhelmed with gratitude that you took a chance on a broken cowboy with nothing to offer but a bad leg and worse attitude. You had more to offer than you realized. You had kindness and integrity and the capacity to love deeply, even when you were trying to hide it. I saw that in you from the very beginning, even before you saw it in yourself." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. The sounds of the ranch surrounded them. Horses moving in the corrals, the creek babbling in the distance, an owl beginning its nightly hunt, the soft murmur of wind through the cottonwood trees. "Are you happy?" Ethan asked. "Completely. Are you?" "More than I ever thought possible. I have everything I need right here. You, our children, this land, this life we built together. If I never have another thing, I will die a satisfied man." "Well, you are not dying anytime soon if I have anything to say about it," Lillian said firmly. "We have at least 50 more years of this ahead of us, and I plan to enjoy every single day." 50 years, Ethan repeated, letting himself imagine it, watching their children grow and marry and have children of their own, building the ranch into something that could be passed down through generations, growing old beside this woman who had transformed his life by simply seeing him clearly and choosing to love him anyway. "At least 50, Lillian confirmed. "Probably more. We Zimmermans are notoriously stubborn about dying young." Ethan laughed, pulling her closer. "Then I will do my best to keep up with you." Inside the house, they heard one of the children cry out, probably David having a nightmare. They both stood immediately, the moment of peaceful reflection giving way to parental duty without hesitation or resentment. This was their life now. Beautiful and ordinary, challenging and rewarding, built on a foundation of love that had survived because they chose it every single day. As they walked inside together to comfort their son, Ethan thought about the long, winding path that had led him to this moment. The betrayal and pain, the months of isolation and bitterness, the chance encounter with a woman who stumbled getting off a stagecoach, the slow building of trust and affection into something deeper and more lasting than he had imagined possible. The cowboy had thought joy skipped the broken, moving past them to visit whole, undamaged people who deserved happiness. But the truth was more complex and more beautiful. Joy did not skip anyone. It waited patiently for the broken to heal, and sometimes, if they were very lucky, it brought someone into their lives who could help with that healing. Someone who could stand beside them while brokenness transformed into wholeness, one day and one choice at a time. Ethan Everett had been broken, shattered by betrayal and loss and disillusionment. But beside Lillian, he had become whole again. And the life they had built together, full of love and purpose and meaning, was proof that even the most damaged hearts could heal if they were brave enough to try. The years continued to pass with the inevitable rhythm of ranch life, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children who filled their house with laughter and occasional chaos. The Everett Ranch expanded steadily, never becoming enormous, but achieving a reputation for quality that made the name valuable throughout Nevada and beyond. Ethan's horses were sought after by ranchers across 3 territories, and he found himself able to command premium prices for his best stock. Lillian's informal school formalized in 1887, when the 5 families she served pooled resources to build a small schoolhouse on land donated by Tom Preston. It sat roughly equidistant from all the participating ranches, a simple one-room building with a wood stove and windows that let in abundant light. Lillian taught there 4 days a week during the school year, and the arrangement worked beautifully for everyone involved. She loved having a proper classroom again, and the children thrived under her patient, creative instruction. David proved to be a natural horseman, with instincts that sometimes seemed to surpass even his father's considerable skills. By age 10, he was training young horses under Ethan's supervision, and by 12, he was doing it independently, showing a gift for understanding equine psychology that left even experienced ranchers impressed. Emma inherited her mother's love of learning and teaching. She helped Lillian in the schoolhouse whenever possible, assisting younger students with their reading and arithmetic, showing a patience and clarity of explanation remarkable in someone so young. It became clear early that she would likely follow her mother into teaching when she came of age. Jacob, the youngest, was the wild spirit of the family, fearless and adventurous, always pushing boundaries and exploring the limits of what was permitted. He kept his parents on their toes with his antics, but possessed such genuine joy and enthusiasm for life that it was impossible to stay angry with him for long. In the spring of 1890, when David was 13, Emma 9, and Jacob 7, the family faced their first major crisis since those early, uncertain years. A late spring storm brought flooding that threatened to wash out the barn and put the horses at risk. Ethan and Lillian worked through the night alongside their older children, moving animals to higher ground, reinforcing walls, digging trenches to redirect water away from the buildings. David performed like an adult that night, taking charge of moving the horses while Ethan worked on the physical structures. At one point, a panicked mare broke free and would have injured herself badly if David had not reacted with speed and confidence, talking her down and leading her to safety despite the danger. When dawn finally came and the crisis had passed with minimal damage, Ethan found his son collapsed against the barn wall, exhausted but triumphant. He sat beside David, putting an arm around the boy's shoulders. "You were incredible tonight. You saved at least 3 horses with your quick thinking and steady nerves." David, who was usually confident to the point of cockiness, looked uncharacteristically uncertain. "I was terrified the whole time. I just did not want to let you down. Being brave does not mean you are not scared. It means you do what needs to be done despite the fear. Tonight you proved you have what it takes to run this ranch someday, if that is what you choose to do with your life." "Is that what you want? For me to take over the ranch?" Ethan considered the question carefully. "I want you to be happy and to choose a life that fulfills you. If that is ranching, I will be proud. If it is something else, I will be equally proud. Never let my dreams dictate your choices, David. That is a mistake too many fathers make." It was a conversation Ethan had thought about for years, determined not to saddle his children with expectations that might cage them. He and Lillian had built this life through their own choices, and they wanted the same freedom for their children. That summer, a letter arrived from St. Louis that Lillian read with tears streaming down her face. It was from her cousin Margaret, whom Lillian had not seen since leaving Missouri 13 years earlier. Margaret wrote that she was widowed now with 2 teenage daughters, struggling financially and wondering if there might be any possibility of work in Nevada. She had heard about Lillian's school and thought perhaps she could help or find some other form of employment. Lillian and Ethan discussed the letter long into the night. Taking in 3 more people would strain their resources and disrupt the rhythm of their household. But Margaret was family, and she needed help. "We have to invite them," Lillian said finally. "When I arrived in Eureka desperate and alone, you helped me without hesitation, even though you owed me nothing. How can I do less for my own cousin?" "Then we invite them," Ethan agreed. "We will figure out the details as we go." Margaret and her daughters, Helen and Ruth, arrived in September on the same stagecoach line that had brought Lillian to Eureka all those years ago. They were exhausted from travel, grieving the life they had left behind, uncertain about the future. Lillian embraced her cousin for a long moment, both women crying, reconnecting across the years and distance that had separated them. The girls, Helen 17 and Ruth 15, were quiet and watchful, taking in the ranch with wide eyes. They had grown up in a city, and the vast open spaces of Nevada were as foreign to them as another planet. "It is so empty," Helen whispered to her mother, not realizing Lillian could hear. "It is full," Lillian corrected gently. "Just full of different things than you are used to. Give it time. I think you will come to love it here." Integrating 3 new people into the household was challenging. The house was crowded, with Helen and Ruth sharing Emma's room while Emma moved into a small storage space that Ethan hastily converted into a tiny bedroom. Margaret took over much of the cooking and household management, freeing Lillian to focus more on the school, and proved to be an excellent cook with a gift for making much from little. Helen found work at the general store in Eureka, making the long journey into town 3 days a week and staying overnight with the store owner's family on those nights. Ruth began attending Lillian's school, despite being older than the other students, catching up on education she had missed while caring for her dying father. The ranch adjusted to its expanded population, and within a year, the new arrangements felt normal rather than disruptive. Margaret's cooking became legendary among the neighboring ranches, and she supplemented the household income by selling baked goods to families who could afford such luxuries. Helen fell in love with one of Tom Preston's ranch hands, a decent young man named William, and they married in the spring of 1892. Ruth discovered a passion for horses that rivaled David's, and she began working alongside Ethan in the training, showing a particular gift for gentling difficult animals. She and David developed a close friendship, working together for hours, debating training techniques and approaches with the intensity of much older professionals. By 1895, 18 years after Ethan and Lillian had first met, the ranch was thriving beyond anything they had imagined in those early days. The horse operation was well established and profitable. The school had expanded to serve nearly 20 students from 8 families. David, at 20, was effectively running much of the day-to-day ranch operations. Emma, at 16, was assisting her mother full-time in the school and already receiving job offers from town schools impressed by her skills. And Jacob, at 14, had channeled his wild energy into becoming the best rider in the family, winning competitions at local fairs and attracting attention from ranchers looking for talented horsemen. Margaret had remarried, to everyone's surprise including her own, to a widowed rancher named Samuel Cooper who owned land bordering the Everett property. The marriage was happy and companionable, 2 lonely people finding comfort and partnership in middle age. Ruth, now 22, remained on the Everett ranch, effectively a member of the family, working with the horses and helping with the younger children when needed. One evening in late summer, Ethan and Lillian escaped the busy household for a rare ride together, just the 2 of them, something they had not done in months. They rode to their favorite spot, the hill overlooking the ranch where they could see everything they had built spread below them. "Do you remember when this was all just empty land and impossible dreams?" Lillian asked, dismounting and settling onto a flat rock that offered the best view. Ethan joined her, his knee protesting only slightly despite the ride. The injury that had once defined his life was now just a minor inconvenience, managed through experience and accommodation. "I remember thinking we were crazy to try this. 2 people with no experience and not enough money, attempting to build a ranch from nothing. We were crazy. Crazy in the best possible way." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Below them, they could see David and Ruth working with a young horse in the training paddock. Margaret was hanging laundry near the house while Emma and Jacob argued about something, their animated gestures visible even from this distance. "I have been thinking about something," Lillian said slowly. "Do you remember that day in Eureka, right after we met, when I said joy skips the broken. I remember. We have talked about it many times over the years. I think I was wrong. Not about joy skipping the broken, but about why. I thought joy avoided broken people because brokenness somehow made us unworthy or unable to experience happiness. But I do not think that is it at all. What do you think now? I think joy does not skip the broken. I think broken people skip joy because we are so focused on our pain that we do not recognize happiness when it is right in front of us. We protect ourselves so carefully from more hurt that we do not let good things in. Joy is always there, always available, but we have to be willing to see it and accept it. Ethan thought about the man he had been in the winter of 1877, so consumed by betrayal and bitterness that he had stopped believing good things were possible. If Lillian had not been persistent, if she had not kept offering friendship and eventually love, if she had not refused to let him hide behind his walls, he might still be that broken, isolated person, living half a life in service to old wounds. "You taught me to see joy again," he said. "You were patient with me when I was difficult and kind when I did not deserve it and persistent when I tried to push you away. You showed me that broken things can heal, but only if we let them." "We healed each other," Lillian corrected. "I was just as broken as you when I arrived in Eureka. I had lost everyone I loved, and I was alone in a strange place with no plan and no hope. You gave me work and friendship and eventually love. You showed me that life continues after loss, that we can build new families and new dreams even after the old ones die. So we were two broken people who became whole beside each other." "Exactly. And now look at what we have created. Look at that ranch down there, full of life and purpose. Look at our children growing strong and confident. Look at the school teaching the next generation. All of that came from two damaged people choosing to trust each other, to build something together, to believe that joy was possible despite everything that had happened before." Ethan pulled her close, kissing her temple. "I love you. After all these years, I love you more now than I did on our wedding day. Is that possible? Not only possible, but inevitable. Love that lasts grows deeper with time, more complex and more precious because it has been tested and proven strong." They rode back to the ranch as twilight fell, the sky turning purple and orange above them. As they approached, they could see lamps being lit in the house windows, warm golden light spilling out into the gathering darkness. Smoke rose from the chimney, and they could hear the faint sounds of voices and laughter. "Home," Lillian said softly. "After everything, we really did build a home." "We did," Ethan agreed. "And it is better than anything I imagined in those early days when we were just surviving day to day." The years that followed brought the inevitable changes of time. Children grew and left to start their own lives, then returned with grandchildren who filled the ranch with new energy. David married Ruth in 1897, a union that surprised no one who had watched them work together for years. They built a house on the northern section of the ranch property and took over management of the horse operation, allowing Ethan to gradually step back from the daily physical labor. Emma became the formal teacher at the regional school, her salary funded by a combination of family tuition and territorial education money, as the government slowly began investing in rural education. She married a young lawyer from Eureka in 1900, and they lived in town during the week, spending weekends at the ranch. Jacob, true to his restless nature, left at 18 to work on a large cattle operation in Montana, but returned after 3 years, declaring that nowhere else felt like home. He brought back a wife, a spirited young woman named Catherine who had grown up on the Montana ranch, and they settled into the old house that Ethan and Lillian had built, taking over the main ranch operations while David focused on the horses. Ethan and Lillian built a smaller house for themselves on the southern edge of the property, a comfortable cottage that required less maintenance and better suited their needs as they aged. It had large windows that let in abundant light, a modern kitchen with a cast iron stove, and a wide porch where they spent hours watching the world turn. By 1905, at age 52, Ethan's hair had gone completely gray, and his old knee injury had progressed to the point where he walked with a cane on bad days. But he remained strong in spirit, still riding when weather permitted, still offering advice to David and Jacob on ranch management, still traveling to neighboring properties to evaluate horses for potential purchase or breeding programs. Lillian, at 50, showed her age only in the silver threading through her auburn hair and the deepening laugh lines around her eyes. She had retired from formal teaching, turning the school over to Emma, but she tutored individual students who needed extra help and wrote curriculum materials that were used by schools throughout the territory. They had 7 grandchildren by then, ranging from infants to children old enough to start learning ranch work. The Everett property had expanded to over 1,000 acres through careful purchases and trades with neighbors, and the family employed several full-time ranch hands to manage the work. One evening in late autumn, with the cottonwood trees along the creek turned golden and the air carrying the first hint of winter cold, the entire extended family gathered for Sunday supper at the main house. It was a tradition they maintained whenever possible, this weekly gathering that kept the sprawling family connected. The long table that Jacob and Catherine had built to accommodate everyone was crowded with food and people. Margaret and Samuel Cooper had ridden over from their ranch. Helen and William had come from their farm with their 3 children. David and Ruth sat with their 2 daughters. Emma and her husband drove out from Eureka with their son and newborn daughter. Jacob and Catherine presided over the chaos with their 2 young sons running wild around the table. At the head of the table, Ethan looked around at the gathered family with something close to awe. All of these people and their lives and their laughter, had grown from a chance meeting on a cold January day 28 years ago. If Marcus had not shot him, he would never have come to Eureka. If Lillian's brother had not died, she would never have left St. Louis. If Ethan had not happened to be at the stable when her stagecoach arrived, if he had not caught her arm when she stumbled, if he had not told her about the laundry position, none of this would exist. The thought was simultaneously humbling and terrifying. So much of life came down to chance and choice, to small moments that seemed insignificant at the time but changed everything that came after. "Grandfather, are you all right?" David's daughter Sarah asked, noticing his emotional expression. "I am perfect, sweetheart. Just thinking about how lucky I am." "Tell the story," one of the younger children called out. "Tell the story about when grandmother fell off the stagecoach." "I did not fall," Lillian protested with mock indignation. "I merely stumbled." "Tell it anyway," several voices chorused. So Ethan told the story, as he had told it dozens of times before, embellishing slightly for dramatic effect. He described the bitter cold of that January day, the stagecoach pulling up, the auburn-haired woman who stepped down and nearly fell. He described catching her arm, the jolt of connection he had felt even then, though he had not understood it at the time. Lillian took over the story when it reached the part about the trunk, making everyone laugh with her description of Ethan's stubborn insistence that he could carry it alone despite his obvious injury. "Your grandfather has always been too proud for his own good," she said with affection. "And your grandmother has always been too stubborn to let anyone help her," Ethan countered. "That has not changed in 28 years. The children clamored for more stories, so they told others. The building of the ranch, the early years when they lived in the barn hayloft, the night David was born with the sunset painting the sky, the flood that nearly destroyed everything, the first successful horse sale that proved their dream could be sustainable, the small victories and the large challenges, the story of a life built together from broken pieces. As the evening wound down and families began preparing to leave, Lillian found herself standing on the porch with Margaret, watching grandchildren chase each other around the yard in the last light of day. "You have built something remarkable here," Margaret said. "When I arrived all those years ago, desperate and afraid, you welcomed me without hesitation. You gave me a place to heal and rebuild my life. I will never forget that kindness." "You are family," Lillian replied simply. "That is what family does. We help each other survive the hard times and celebrate the good ones. Not all families work that way. Many fall apart at the first sign of trouble. Then maybe the key is choosing our family as much as being born into it. Ethan and I chose each other, and then we chose to build something larger than ourselves. We chose to help you when you needed it, and Ruth chose to stay and become part of this. David and Ruth chose each other. All of it has been choices, made over and over again, to love and support and create something good." Inside the house, someone started playing the piano, and children's voices rose in an enthusiastic, if somewhat off-key song. The sound drifted out into the autumn evening, a testament to life and continuity, to joy found and nurtured despite the brokenness that had preceded it. Ethan joined the women on the porch, slipping an arm around Lillian's waist. "What are you two plotting out here?" "No plotting, just reflection," Lillian said, leaning into his embrace. "Thinking about how far we have all come. From broken to whole," Margaret said softly. "That is the journey all of us have made in different ways." "The cowboy thought joy skips the broken," Lillian said, repeating the words that had become almost a family motto over the years. "But then the broken became whole beside each other, and joy did not skip us after all. It found us and made a home with us, and now it lives in our children and grandchildren and everyone who gathers at this table." They stood together in the gathering darkness, three people who had survived loss and hardship and had found their way to something better. The ranch building spread around them, solid and enduring. The sounds of family filled the air, voices layered over each other in the comfortable chaos of people who belonged together. This was the happy ending that had seemed impossible in those early days of brokenness. This was proof that joy did not skip the broken but waited patiently for them to heal enough to recognize it. This was the legacy of two people who had met by chance, fallen in love through choice, and built a life that would extend beyond themselves through generations to come. Ethan thought about the young man who had limped into Eureka nursing a wounded leg and a more deeply wounded heart, convinced that happiness was forever beyond his reach. He thought about the woman who had arrived grieving and alone, with nothing but determination and a capacity for hope that refused to die despite terrible circumstances. They had been broken, both of them. But they had healed beside each other, and in healing, they had created something beautiful and enduring. Their love story was not about perfection or ease. It was about two damaged people choosing each other every day, working through difficulties together, building something from nothing through persistence and faith and mutual support. The years ahead would bring more challenges and more changes. Ethan's health would decline gradually, his body wearing out from decades of hard labor. Lillian would nurse him through those final years with the same devotion she had shown from the beginning. And when he died peacefully in their cottage at age 72, surrounded by family, his last words would be her name and a whispered "thank you." Lillian would live another 15 years after that, watching great-grandchildren be born, watching the ranch continue to thrive under new generations, watching the love she and Ethan had built continue to ripple outward through all the lives it touched. And when she finally passed at age 85, her family would gather to remember not her death but her life, all the ways she had changed the world through simple acts of kindness and fierce, enduring love. But those endings were still far in the future. On this autumn evening in 1905, they were very much alive, standing on the porch of the home they had built, surrounded by the family they had created, living proof that broken people could become whole, that joy did not skip anyone who was brave enough to reach for it, that love could heal even the deepest wounds if given time and patience and genuine commitment. The cowboy had thought joy skips the broken, but he had been wrong. Joy had been waiting all along, patient and persistent, for the broken to heal enough to recognize it. And when Lillian had stumbled off that stagecoach into his life, she had brought joy with her, disguised as a simple offer of friendship, revealing itself gradually as love, transforming two broken people into something whole and beautiful and lasting. That was the truth they had discovered together and would pass down through generations. Joy does not skip the broken. It waits for us to heal, and sometimes, if we are very fortunate, it sends someone to help us do the healing. Someone who sees past the brokenness to the person underneath. Someone who believes we are worth the effort. Someone who stands beside us while we put ourselves back together, piece by piece, day by day, until the broken places become scars rather than open wounds, reminders of survival rather than symbols of destruction. Ethan and Lillian had found each other in a harsh place at a difficult time, and they had chosen to build something better together. That choice, made and remade thousands of times over nearly 3 decades, had transformed not just their own lives but the lives of everyone around them. It had created a family, a ranch, a school, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. As darkness fell completely and stars emerged in the vast Nevada sky, the family gathered inside began to disperse. Children bundled into wagons and carriages for the journey home. Ethan and Lillian stood together on the porch, waving goodbye, their hands linked as they had been countless times before. "Happy?" Ethan asked, the question that had become their evening ritual. "Completely," Lillian replied, the answer that never varied. "You, more than words can express. More than I ever imagined possible. More than any broken cowboy deserved." "You were never broken," Lillian said, squeezing his hand. "You were wounded and healing. There is a difference. And you deserved every good thing that came to you, because you were brave enough to hope again, to trust again, to love again despite everything that happened before." They stood together in the starlight, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built a life that proved love was stronger than betrayal, hope more powerful than despair, and joy always, always available to those brave enough to reach for it, broken pieces and all.